Good evening and welcome to our final Rebellious Research Seminar series this academic year. It's with a great pleasure I say hello to Professor Ian Brown from Staffordshire University. Ian, can I just ask you to introduce yourself and explain to us what you're going to be talking about this hour?
Yeah. So I'm Professor Ian Brown, Professor of Fine Art. So work in a mixture of different types of research, but predominantly practice-based. I kind of lead the unit of assessment, unit of assessment lead for art and design at university, and I've done a few things about practice-based research in particular. And today I'm gonna talk about sort of two projects. One that's sort of runs, and people might kind of identify with this. It's been kind of running for a kind of long time, 10 years or something, with different little kind of moments throughout it, which is quite speculative. And I know that me and Agatha talked a little bit about certain types of speculative research and how they map onto expectations for funding and things like that. And then another project which is kind of shorter and is kind of speculative, but it was also kind of to a degree opportunistic. So I just thought those two were quite interesting to look at. One is a project on my own as an individual researcher, and the other is I work with two other artists, and they're both professors as well, called Common Culture. So there's the three of us, so it's a kind of collaborative project. So I thought I'd just look at those two and it might be kind of useful. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the next hour is yours, whichever way you want to use it. If you'd like to share your screen.
Yeah.
But thank you so much. Wonderful.
Well, thanks for inviting us to do this. Like I said.
No, thank you.
I would like to record this computer screen. Okay. I had my computer re-imaged. Yeah. Okay. So it's going to have to quit and reopen.
Take your time.
Second. Okay. I had to change some privacy and security settings. Right, this should work now. This.
Wonderful, we can see it now.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I thought I'd sort of discuss these sort of projects just as a way of like open up a conversation about the way in which certain types of practice as a kind of, you know, or certain types of research that's kind of searching for things, which is the sort of point of the research, can be a little bit tricky and can be really interesting, but also frustrating as a kind of process. So I'll have a look at that. So this was the project that started, a long time ago, and that was the title that I had at the time. I don't know whether it's going to stay there, but it was just for me to kind of categorize the things that I was kind of interested in. So I'd come out of other kind of projects that I was doing, and I was particularly interested in plant-human relations and I guess the difference between how they're mediated scientifically, or the role of those, or the context of that interrelationship, that intersection scientifically, and also the difference between that and a kind of how that relationship is mediated through popular culture. So I was looking a lot at literature and film, which often uses plants to talk about other subjects. So the Day of the Triffids was really about the Cold War, but some of it is about kind of genetic modification and things that were happening in the former Soviet Union, and how that kind of speaks of a kind of othering of plants and a kind of fear. But then also looking at other forms of popular culture. So the secret life of plants became really popular, and most of it is formed around the experiments of Cleve Baxter, who was a former FBI agent, I think, who did lots of tests on plants in terms of their sentience, which is completely unfounded scientifically, but became quite popular and a kind of bestseller. So it's kind of looking at these different ways in which popular culture mediates our relationship with plants. So off the back of that, I kind of got a small grant to work with, to visit Royal Botanic Gardens Kew and meet with some colleagues there. So this is a still from the film version of The Day of the Triffids. It's not the best iteration, but in one of the early sequences, there's a night watchman, as we see here, and he's walking around one of the, I think it's the Palm building at Kew, and he hears a noise and he's searching for this kind of noise, and then a triffid appears. But there was something in that kind of sense of the idea of locating or searching that I was kind of particularly interested in, and I wanted to meet the people at Kew whose role related to that and have some conversations about that. So I was kind of introduced to, I spent a lot of time in the herbarium, which is where a lot of the taxonomists and other, mainly taxonomists, work. So these are all their kind of files, which are either kind of samples of plants or copies of that. So I was kind of introduced to the ways in which they kind of work and function. And I started to meet up with Will Lewis, who is a taxonomist and was kind of head of the legume department when I started working with him, and then he became the legume department. So it's kind of interesting to hear about funding across sectors being kind of reduced. He was the head of the department, and then after about 3 years, he was the department. And he was really in. We had lots of conversations. He took me through lots of processes, a lot of which were kind of incidental. And I was kind of, so we had a conversation about speculative practices and seeing what occurs and what happens. And obviously he was kind of interested in that from his perspective as a taxonomist, where the kind of methodological processes are quite kind of strict, if you like, and you adhere to certain processes, and then your the new plant that you find is then drawn and you describe its uniqueness, and then it's published, and all those sort of things. But he spoke to me about this kind of journal that was when there was a lot of money swilling around Kew a long time ago. So obviously this is from 1849. The director of Kew sort of initiated this publication, which was brought together kind of stories that weren't fundamental scientific inquiry, because he was kind of interested in actually some of these stories might end up leading to things. So it was about the way in which different types of conversation and different kinds of stories are interesting and could be useful for scientific inquiry. So we had this kind of conversation, and Gwil's a really interesting guy. And he spoke to me about, I met him one morning, and he had just opened an email, and then he said, oh, I'll just close this down. I'm going to take you into the herbarium. And he showed me a photograph of a plant. He showed me a sample of a plant and a photograph of a plant. And he says, these are the only two in any herbarium in the world. That's a photograph in Paris from the same expedition of this sample that we have at Kew. They're from the same expedition. And he's never known what colour the flowers were, because there is some flowers left on it, but they're great. And he's been looking for this plant for sort of 30 years. He took me back to my office, and this guy that he knows in Colombia, who's not a botanist but just interested, sent him a photograph of this plant. And it's the first time he's ever seen that plant and what it looks like. So there's just something about the way in which often certain narratives cut through and kind of bounce back and forth between different kind of meaningful experiences, between, finding new species or just the idea of seeing it for the first time. So we had some really, really interesting conversations about the relationship between my kind of research processes and his, and how different, but also how kind of interesting they were. So it was a really kind of worthwhile set of conversations, and we're still in touch. And yeah, so that was kind of really interesting. So when I was first started to go to Kew, so this is the part of the speculative, is that I'm interested in kind of an overview of this kind of plant-human kind of relationship. I mean, that's extremely broad. So speaking to a taxonomist was giving me particular insights into that relationship and naming procedures. And Will was telling me about, often people would, if they found a particularly ugly plant, they would name it after another taxonomist that they didn't like or in competition with. So they're quite humorous kind of things. But I also worked with the kind of head librarian of their archives, which is it's not taxonomic, about what kind of materials that they have in their kind of archive. And they have a set of documents where people who want to photograph or film at Kew would have to kind of write. So it's I think it starts in like 1967 and ends in 1992. And they sort of dug out for me, and there was no record of what's in it. So I made a bit of a record for them because no one's looked at it, I don't think. So I was looking for different things. Initially, I was kind of looking for whether there was any record of when they made the Day of the Triffids, and whether it was a studio set or whether they visited Kew or filmed in Kew. There's no information about that, but there's lots of interesting kind of letters, but including this one, which is somebody, so Ronnie Bear from Hawk Films, which was Stanley Kubrick's production team, had contacted because they were making the Welwitschia mirabilis, which is a kind of ancient plant, and they wanted to make a model of it for the opening sequence of 2001: Space Odyssey. So there's this kind of moment where you're then kind of intersecting, and obviously because a lot of the kind of the areas that I was looking into in terms of the plants being othered sits within science fiction. So you get these moments where, oh, this is kind of curious, which is both really useful and interesting because you come across something that you weren't looking for and that leads a certain conversation, but is also, it just adds to the things that then become interesting about it. This is why that kind of, for me, that kind of speculative research practice is a joy and a curse. So it keeps offering things, and then it's about navigating what you do with them. Also, as part of their archive, they have lots of predominantly 16mm film, which again, no one looks at. It's dusty. Most of these things I was looking at, and they can't remember anybody ever requesting to look at them. So I got all of these cans out. So they've got complete films, normally for television, BBC and Granada TV, but they have lots of cans of like trims, so bits that have bwas cut off in editing that have never been broadcast or were deemed as, too long a sequence or not valuable enough to broadcast. So I was kind of interested in these little fragments and the way that some of them are things that have just been left out and have never been part of the things that were broadcast. So I was kind of looking at those, and I'll come back to that a bit later on. And also part of their collection is a collection of wax orchids. They're made of paper and wax, and they were produced by Edith Blackman, who's a model maker, and she made lots of things for the National Natural History Museum and lots of other places. She was, very well regarded. Nobody at Kew really knows why they were commissioned. The botanical illustrators don't think they would have ever been used for their purposes because They always go directly to specimens. So no one really knows, but they have this collection of them, and they're quite remarkable things in their own right. But in terms of serving a kind of taxonomic purpose, there's some kind of questions around it. So I was really interested in these as sort of surrogates for something. They're kind of facsimiles. They're human-made. So there's something there about this kind of tension between studying and finding, and then these objects which aren't plants, they're not orchids, but they kind of, look like they are, of course. So at this time I was also reading The Orchid Thief by Susan Orleans, which is a kind of really interesting look at, it kind of moves between a couple of different timelines, but it does look at the history of orchid collecting and the ruthlessness and the kind of commodification of it. So often orchid hunters were absolutely ruthless mercenaries, and they would find a group of orchids, collect as many as they could, and then destroy all the rest so that nobody else could get them, and it would increase the market value. So there's a lot to kind of really, interesting, troubling stories about the commodification of nature at that kind of period. So at this time I was kind of looking, they had this this model, one of Edith Blackman's models, but it was heavily damaged. They don't know what species it is. So they don't, there's no name that goes with it. It's broken. It's missing the flowering part. So I sort of, but it becomes valuable within the collection. It's as valuable as the others in the collection because it's part of the collection. It's it's protected, if you like. So at this point in time, when I kind of started looking at this curious object, I was also having conversations with Lucy T. Smith, who does a lot of botanical illustrations at Kew. So she'll work with the taxonomist to produce the images that then get published and then peer reviewed in terms of its uniqueness. So I kind of spoke to her about working on some botanical illustrations of this broken model. So it kind of looks at what she does, but it's kind of utilizing it for a way that she wouldn't normally use it. So she was really interested in this, and I worked with her, and she produced a series of images that she kind of put these register marks on because I'm kind of working to kind of animate them, and there's a little kind of test that you can see. But so she did a series of images from the observational image of it as it exists, and then kind of almost imagining that it would be fixed and it would move to being like that. But of course we can't introduce the flowering portion because nobody knows what it is. So I was kind of interested in utilizing that kind of the process that runs alongside taxonomy, but applying it for a different use, and in a way that this particular model and anything that comes after it sits in this kind of in between, this kind of liminal space of knowing what it is and what importance it might have. So I was just playing around with these are just little tests of kind of animating it just to kind of get a sense of what that could potentially do, and looking at the potential of those aspects of anthropomorphizing, which is obviously a strategy used in science fiction a lot to other plants, but to see them as a threat. But I was interested in perhaps playing around with that, not as a threat, but in some other ways. So it's a kind of little test in relationship to that. And then I also worked in the herbarium buildings themselves with other wax models, and I was kind of interested again in using kind of science fiction strategies to have them kind of not othering them, well, playing around with notions of othering, and also looking at languages of the documentary format and thinking about the agenda of documentary. So I was kind of looking a lot at documentaries at that time where there's a lot of stop frame animation to speed up the growth of plants to human speed so that we can engage. And I was sort of thinking about that as being kind of, you know, a curious thing, that's a process in a way of anthropomorphizing, and kind of it changes what they are in order for us to understand them. So I was kind of working with these plants throughout the herbarium, and just having them in this kind of setting where we're not sure what they're doing there, and they kind of float in space. And then I also kind of did some kind of film work, again looking at the languages of documentary filmmaking and science fiction, and kind of playing around with those. So I'll just play this little kind of clip. I can move past that. Just that's the end, really. And I know that me and Agatha were talking a little bit, because I remember at some part of the process of working at Kew, I was having a conversation, I think, with Leverhulme, and I'd phoned up one of the officers there and talking about costings for things, and I ended up having this bizarre conversation, and obviously my partner was sort of in the same room when I was on the phone, so who's also an academic and also an artist, and I was asking about funding for practice-based research, because it was, you know, I wanted to kind of, as you can see, sort of exploring the potential of things through making kind of kind of artworks, or tests for artworks, and the hiring of equipment and different things like that. And they just didn't understand what I meant, and they just said, well, we don't fund, you know, the making of artworks. And I'm like, no, but it's research, it's practice-based research. I use it to figure things out. And it was just really bizarre. And then I sort of explained, you know, the ref research criteria, because I thought that might help, and it didn't. And I think things might have changed a little bit. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I haven't applied for Leverhulme since, and hopefully they have. But my partner was like, who were you talking to? And I was like, oh, someone from the Leverhulme. And she was just, what? And they don't understand practice-based research. I said, well, no. So all the sorts of things that I'm showing as part of this project, all the things are kind of using practice to test out ideas and to see what the potential could be. So Hugh got in touch with me, I don't know, maybe it's a year later, and I was still working on some of those things, and they they were busy working with this collection called the Miscellaneous Reports Collection, which, again, it was a collection of theirs that people hadn't really been looking at, and they were wanting to get some funding in order to kind of create a kind of database and preserve some of it. And they just said, I think there's just stuff in here that you'd find interesting. So I kind of went down and started to look through stuff. And so I kind of helped them a bit with their funding bid as well, because they want to, and it's complete now, which is great. They wanted to preserve it and provide a database so that researchers from lots of different fields can access it and find out what's in it. So it's predominantly I mean, it's miscellaneous for a reason. There's a lot of very different things, but it's predominantly a kind of time period from the mid 1800s to 1920 something, centered around the fact that Kew was the sort of center of kind of economic botany in the kind of British Empire. So it's very colonial, and it's also part of Kew kind of addressing their role in kind of commodification of resources and labour, the movement of plants to generate wealth for the nation as part of the kind of colonial kind of expansion and then retraction, I guess. So I was sort of like, again, it's that thing of just being curious, which is great. It releases really interesting things, but it obviously it releases lots of things. And then it's thinking about what one can do about it. So there was lots of correspondence between different individuals and the director at the time. So this is some correspondence from a linguist, botanist, and anti-colonialist, a German guy called Gottlieb Adolf Kraus. And he got in touch with Kew because he was able to get some peanut samples for them, and he kind of knew that they wanted them. So there's this exchange between him and Kew. And what's interesting about it is that there is this conversation going on, and then in the background there's another conversation between Kew and the British government and all of the heads of the botanical institutes in different countries. So this is kind of what would have been called the Gold Coast, and centres around Accra. And all the questions in the background were like, who is this guy? And so we'll ask the kind of German colonial heads, and they said don't trust him. And so he's kind of an interesting character, and this is you know, and probably people there's not much written about him, but I did find a book where there was a little bit written about him. But yeah, so he lived in Africa and lived with various groups of people, got to speak several indigenous languages, and essentially tried to prevent the German government from exploiting them. And obviously that led to him not having his work published. I think he was brought before the for a trial, I think, to put him in prison. Lots of different things because of his role in non-compliance and things. So really interesting character, and you see this kind of relationship between two different conversations. So I was kind of interested to find this kind of particular aspect of the story and the narrative there. But then alongside that, there was things where which kind of start to tap into some of those narratives of sort of disaster movies and the kind of othering of animals and plants. So there's the head of one of the botanical resources in Accra. Just the notes. Yeah, William. He was the governor. William Brandford Griffith, and he's writing a report about this swarm of locusts, which was devastating kind of the fields around Accra. And it's very, you know, it's a sort of an official report, but it's quite emotive. So it have all these characteristics which kind of creep up often in sort of certain types of narratives, including science fiction, and looks at the kind of relationship between plants and insects. So you've got all these kind of different kind of narratives, all within this kind of miscellaneous report, which is kind of curious and intriguing, and it, you know, all of the other kind of archives within Q have very particular focuses, and this has this kind of interweaving narrative. So it kind of, it allows for kind of yeah, it allows for people to kind of investigate those narratives in a different way, I think, and connect those narratives. So I presented a paper at the Bosnia Trade and Empire conference at Kew, which was during COVID. So that was obviously my internet went down, didn't it? But which is really interesting. But it was also interesting because the person who was chairing my panel was really interested in what I was doing, but I think the 99% of the people that were there for taxonomical reasons. So, you know, it's a real sense that there's a kind of outlier, or felt like an interloper, which was kind of interesting and useful. But in terms of the kind of terms that I might use in terms of research, because I'm kind of interested in things like appropriation and as a kind of methodological tool, it was kind of a very different kind of conversation than was happening with the other speakers. So it was kind of useful and interesting. And then as part of looking at that miscellaneous report collection, I started to kind of relook at some of the kind of film archives and scan them, and I was I mean, like hand scan them. This is kind of on a scanner, so it's just me kind of looking through stuff. And again, it's that thing of trying to locate and find things that might be kind of interesting to utilize as the kind of ready-made, if you like. So I've just been playing around with putting together. That's not playing. Playing a little bit. So these are various clips that were removed from broadcast material, and this set of footage is predominantly set at Kew, and frames a certain kind of relationship between plants and humans through that kind of taxonomical study. And it's just sort of looking at that kind of material as something to start playing around with. So I've just kind of been kind of playing around and having a look at it. And then what time are we on? This is just another video, which is a kind of development from the previous one. So I won't play it because I think we'll run out of time.
You have plenty of time, Ian, if you want
you
to.
think so? Okay. Yeah. I don't know how long it is. I'll play a little bit of it. So this was looking at, this is kind of going to be a proposal for a kind of part of an exhibition, which would be multi-screen. And it's sort of looking at the different parts of a part of Kew that no one gets access to because the herbarium's not open to the public. And it's also trying to weave together some of those kind of narratives. So it uses a lot of the text from some of the documents that I've been looking at and the different narratives between, you know, applications for filming or the kind of colonial reports. So I'll play a little bit. Yeah.
Government House, Christiansborg Castle, Accra. The 27th of February, 1893.
From Hawk Films Limited. MGM Studios, Bournemouth, Hearts, England. February 28, 1967.
It may be interesting to your lordship to be informed that on Thursday the 23rd instant, I received a telegram from the curator at Aburi, stating that the entire station was covered over by vast swarms of locusts and that he feared they would be very destructive to the plants in the garden.
Dear Sir, Welwitschia mirabilis. We understand from the Royal Horticultural Society that you have a specimen or specimens of the above plant at Kew Gardens.
On the following morning, At 10:15, the colonial secretary called my attention, by telephone, to a vast swarm of locusts that was approaching Accra in the form of a semicircle from the north, the middle appearing to be in the vicinity of the governor's lodge, 2 miles northeast from Accra. They extended east and west as far as the eye could see. The sky in one direction could only be seen through the dark cloud of these insects.
Would it be possible for our company to send down a photographer in order to take several pictures, which would then enable us to reproduce an artificial specimen of the above plant for possible use on our film, entitled 2001, A Space Odyssey, currently in production at MGM Studios, Elstree. Yours faithfully, Ronnie Bear. Directors, Stanley Kubrick, USA, Victor Linden, Ron Phipps.
Their numbers were simply beyond all calculation. They appeared to occupy a space about 2 miles wide and from 1/4 of a mile to a mile in height. They gradually came round in a semicircular direction, curving from Accra towards the governor's lodge, going on to Labadi and keeping as close to the sea as the grass extended on the sand.
March 7, 1967. Dear Mr. Bear, Welwitschia Bainesiae. I am sorry that I have not been able to reply earlier to your letter of February 28 about the above.
So that's just a kind of little excerpt of some kind of tests. So it's also, they would all be on separate large screens as well. So yeah, so that's kind of this kind of ongoing project, and just sort of how the kind of practice-based research is just allowing to kind of play around with things and bring in things from archives and explore things, and some of the advantages and disadvantages of that, I guess. And is very much about kind of speculative kind of research. And then this project, I mean, it's speculative to a degree, but it's also a kind of a particular opportunistic occurrence that I just thought was interesting as a point of difference. So this is some work with myself, David Campbell and Mark Durden, and we're Common Culture. And this is our website. And then one day this was our website. So we got in touch with the people who did our website, and they said, yeah, your website's been hacked. There was nothing left behind that would lead it anywhere, but they were like, it's been hacked. So we were kind of like, why do anyone want to hack our website? But we didn't notice that we used to be the first person in the Google search. And then after this happened, we weren't. So the website person was saying, well, you know, it could be likely that someone has, you know, done something in order to kind of shift their priority in the search engine. So we just sort of, you know, not in a way of saying, oh, well, this person's just done this thing, but it, you know, it was a kind of possibility. So, but we were kind of interested in this other person using this term, I guess, you know. So we sort of started to look. We're back at the top again. Don't know what that means. So we're starting to look at this other common culture, and so as a group, we're really interested in consumption, commodity culture, and a kind of critique of those things that you know, that kind of affect us all, I guess, and that we're all part of. I mean, we're kind of interested to see about this iteration. So essentially, it was an individual, an entrepreneur called Conor Franta, who'd set up a kind of brand, a lifestyle brand, nonetheless. But it was also using certain terms that we, as you know, kind of artistically, that we were really interested, because he'd curated coffee, which I thought was an interesting use of the word curating. And then he sort of put things, as we can see here, that this iteration, this is the latest iteration in Connor's passion to commerce tale. And that you know, in a sense, for them, that's a real positive, that they can turn passion into money. Whereas I guess we're kind of slightly critical of that being the best outcome of those things, rather than culture that might kind of engage us and feed our, sense of self or intellect or any of those things. So there's things like productized creativity, and obviously, we're kind of working in relationship to the kind of legacy of the kind of culture industry in Adorno and Horkheimer, and the kind of complications around that. So we're really interested in that he was talking about the same subject, but from the kind of opposite position. So it's just, and this is Confronter. So really, this isn't really about him as an individual. It allowed us a window into a particular type of territory, which is looking at kind of celebrity internet personalities. And we were kind of really interested in that territory and what role it occupied. And the name, our kind of name of our kind of artistic group was kind of formed in relationship to Raymond Williams in a sense of thinking about how culture cuts through society and not being hierarchical and where it sits. And we were kind of interested in that kind of how it was being pitched in terms of from kind of France's position as something that had this thing about premium and superior. So it was kind of selling a notion of something that you need, something that's better than everything else, and that it's kind of important. So we're kind of interested in some of those things, and we much like in my own individual practice, we're really interested in the use of the ready-made and the use of appropriation. And obviously, appropriation more recently has been discussed with the problems around cultural appropriation, where things move from one culture to another, but it doesn't move with a kind of understanding necessarily. It becomes a kind of superficial quality, I guess. But I guess fundamentally, and we're interested in appropriation, as Schneider discusses here, that it's a principal practice underlying any culture contact or exchange, which then leads to the understanding of each other. So that is a kind of fundamental aspect, which of course relies on a kind of equality of power between those who exchange. So I was kind of looking at this in relationship to some of the kind of documents in the miscellaneous report collection, because obviously they're around kind of economic botany in a period of colonial period where there isn't that equality of power. So it's not really an exchange; it's a kind of it's one way. So we're kind of really interested in that notion of appropriation as a way of understanding. And then we're also really interested in this notion of the attention economy and how that functions. And we're all aware that our attention is so they use the term attention economy, but also attention capital, and how that works and the importance of it, and that is kind of the essence of someone like a celebrity kind of internet figure is maximizing people kind of watching, engaging, liking. So we're also kind of looking at a few things. So we're looking at change.org, which we kind of know is normally a platform for people to discuss quite important political issues, to try and get kind of petitions and things. And there was people so invested in this individual. And again, I said it's not really about them, but it's about him as a type, if you like, but really invested on putting something on change.org to get Conor Franta to be on the Ellen show. So this sense that you gain kind of followers on your websites, and then they become mobilized to do things like this, and reuniting two kind of YouTubers together. I mean, they didn't gain much traction, sort of 12 and 15 supporters, but I guess it's an indication of the kind of the investment from followers. And because he'd launched this brand, you know, the X thing, collaboration with Urban Outfitters, but it wasn't available in the UK. People were like, this is unfair. We want it to be in the UK. And we were really interested in looking not only at his content as the nature of that type of content, but also where the kind of personal is monetized as kind of entertainment, as attention, but also the way in which the comments on the YouTube videos gave an indication of the impact on those people who were engaging with it. And you had people that would be saying things like, I wish I didn't live in the UK, or I wish I didn't live in India, because they couldn't get hold of some vaguely generic t-shirts, but because they were his t-shirts. So it was kind of really interesting seeing that level of kind of impact that people would kind of vocalize through their comments about him, how much they liked him, but also how it kind of allowed them to speak about themselves and say things which almost start to kind of become problematic in terms of them speaking about their own identities and how that kind of relates to it being suppressed to be part of something else. So we're kind of really interested in all of those things. So we were working with lots of the comments and the videos. So there's a little clip in a bit, but we took we had a couple of shows. The first one was in Berlin, and we looked at every. I say we, it was me, but conceptually we looked at all of the clips that he'd produced from when he first started as a YouTuber up to the point of the exhibition in Berlin, and just had a clip of his introduction, which becomes quite refined and professional over this period of years. And so this kind of video was just him introducing all his videos. And then we looked at lots of the comments that were being made about his videos, and we're kind of reappropriating those as stickers that could be placed up in the street. But there was, so lots of things were kind of really interesting because they then sort of, indicated that there is this kind of moment where you have people without the economic means to purchase items, and they feel that that's a problem because they just want stuff. They want these kind of commodities. Or, that it's also the kind of use of the term aesthetic and the kind of drama about the kind of comments, presumably with the assumption that he would read all of these comments. And also because of that kind of sense that the attention economy kind of relies on people feeling part of something. There is lots of comments of people talking about that they feel part of something. So I think with this was when he announced that Common Culture was going to be launched, and the people that were watching the video were feeling special about it. So there's kind of all of these things. So we've produced lots of kind of GIFs that we can kind of utilize kind of through social media. And obviously kind of for us, it was sort of playing off the idea that it sounds like we're saying it about us, but it becomes quite clear that it isn't us because we don't do some of these things. But this kind of level of investment. So we worked with a kind of graphic designer to kind of come up with lots of different stickers which we could animate. So that was just one of the comments. I'll play a little bit of this.
Hey, what's up, you guys? Hey, what's up, you guys? Connor. Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Connor. Wow. Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Connor. 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 Hey, what's up, you guys? Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Connor. Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Connor. Hey, what's up, you guys? Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Connor. Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Connor. Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Connor. Hey, what's up, you guys? It's Connor.
I'll
Seriously,
just
hey,
move
what's
it
up, you
along a
guys?
bit
It's
so
Connor.
you can kind of see.
Hi, greetings and such. Hey, what's up, you guys? Hey, what's up, you guys? Hey, what's up, everyone? Hey, what's up, you guys? Hey, what's up, you guys? Hey, what's up, everyone? Hey, what's up, you guys? Hey, what's up, you guys? Surprised to see me here? I'm surprised to be here. This is a new record for a lot of videos in 1 week. I'm only here because I have a super duper special announcement for you guys. And I know I say stuff like that a lot, but this is honestly a really, really big thing for me to finally talk about. As a lot of you guys know, I have been working on my brand called Common Culture. And I have been teasing you guys for basically a year about this. And like all of that stuff was leading up to this very big moment where I would launch all of that under one website, one brand, one thing. And adding in the music, everything has just been so separate with Common Culture that it really hasn't made sense until now. I have been working on this brand and this website for literally a year. So I am so excited to finally talk about it. Everything. Hey guys.
So yeah, so the kind of video show, the first part of the video shows someone. It's really about not about him, but about our kind of culture and society where this happened, and someone who kind of is growing up, if you like, in front of us through these kind of YouTube videos and becoming more professional, more sophisticated, and wealthier. So we're kind of really interested in appropriation as a strategic tool, if you like, and I think increasingly it can be and perhaps will be seen more, because I mean, as long as there's a parody clause in which legally you can reuse existing ready-made footage without breaching any copyright regulations, at least in the UK, I think in Europe, which does allow people to respond to things utilizing those sources, which in some ways also kind of allows us to respond to the fact that lots of material kind of enters our orbit and it's quite hard to avoid it. And I think under those conditions, we have every right to respond, I guess. So for Berlin, we kind of produced a Common Culture store with a website that just gave a link to the video. And we could do that because we're called Common Culture, so it's not a breach of any copyright, and we're not selling anything. Legally, the only issue would have been if we'd sold things and people thought that they were buying something from the other Common Culture. So we were careful legally, but we were also covered in terms of appropriation through the parody clause. So this was a kind of the opening to a gallery space, which was shut, and it was just a closed down store with all of the kind of comments as kind of street stickers, and other stickers appeared by other people through the show as well. And obviously it was in Berlin, so we moved some things into German, and we also had some of those comments about people saying things about the not wishing that they weren't from the country, or wishing they weren't that nationality as well, which is kind of curious in that context, I think. And then it went on to another show in Portugal, a place called Rampa, where it was kind of part of some other works that were also kind of appropriating other forms of celebrity interviews and things. Yeah, so I think that's the end of that. So yeah, I just thought they were quite different projects, and they might be kind of use.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ian. It really was a very different project to what we normally have here, which is fantastic. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. And you kind of shifted from, plants to something completely, different towards the end. So really fascinating. I think it's going to be an amazing addition to the archive, I'm trying to create here, because very often we just have someone coming and speaking about very I don't know what's the word, like condensated project where you have one output, it's very specific, it's a film, it's a piece of music, it's something like this. Whereas obviously what you're talking about here, which links to the question you mentioned, or kind of issues you had with funding, is this kind of thing which has many branches really. It's not just one thing, it's more a conceptual idea behind what you're trying to do. Any kind of it has so many ways of being materialized, if that makes sense. So I'm gonna take the privilege of being the person who hosts this, and I'm gonna ask the first question, and hopefully we can have a nice discussion afterwards. But how do you, like, when you start a project, because I'm trying to always bring it back to the basics for, in terms of thinking about PhD students or early career researchers, people who work with fine arts, film, any kind of creative arts, and they have ideas and they have no idea how to go about it. How do you start your projects? How does the idea start? How does it then develop into something which becomes research and becomes integrated into regular dissemination practices in a kind of creative and artistic context, but also remains closely linked to academia? How do you do it?
I mean, I guess like many people are sort of practice-based. There's sort of overarching concerns, and there's always something coming up before the other one's finished. Do you know what I mean? It's that sort of thing where there's never really a moment where you kind of sat there going, right, what do I do? There's always kind of connections between things. So before the project at Kew, I was working on a project that was related to, again, to do with fictions and real iterations of the same thing. So looking at how popular culture was kind of utilizing the kind of disaster and a lot of the disaster films from, I guess, the 50s onwards, and again those big Hollywood ones, and then looking at the ways in which other forms, particularly kind of songwriting and a lot of kind of folk culture, would, as a form of kind of reporting back, would write lots of songs, often based on the same tunes, which were about recording, if you like, kind of oral recordings of certain types of disasters. And I was kind of looking at how kind of different they were and what the agenda was. And obviously one is about kind of, it's part of an industry. It's about, it's putting bums on seats and it's kind of selling stuff. And the other is about trying to form a kind of a human relationship with something outside of those kind of commodified forms in the same way. I mean, there are a little bit of aspects of that. So I was just kind of looking at the ways in which popular culture mediates experiences to us, and where there might be points to kind of critique that or to look at that, because obviously that's what happened to us. So because I was looking at those things, and again, that kind of resulted in the sort of completion of a project, generating kind of recording songs to wax cylinder and producing these prints and having these performances, which then ended up at the National Maritime Museum, because a lot were related to kind of maritime disaster. I'd sort of ended up watching a lot of disaster films, which then starts to overlap with certain types of films, like that include kind of plants as a kind of form of disaster. So there's I forgot what it's called now. There's one with Mark Wahlberg, which is kind of, it's terrible and brilliant at the same time, but about spores that get released and people just walk off buildings and things. So it was just there was a kind of territory which then led me somewhere else through looking at how plant-human relationships between literature and film were being explored, and then thinking about the different iterations of that which weren't being mediated by popular culture, or maybe were, but in a different way. And then that kind of led me down kind of that path. And I guess the reason for showing those two different ones was that because I work with two other people as a collaborative thing, and I've also got other things that I want to do outside of that, they kind of run, sort of alongside each other. Yeah. And they come in and out of focus, which is also something that other people might experience, where if you're working on more than one kind of project, it's finding when you move between the two and when you kind of put things into it, I guess. And And I guess during this period, we were making quite a lot of common culture work. So the Q1 was just in some ways in quite a good way, because it's there. I'm really busy and doing everything in another space, but then I get to kind of come back to it and just like, how do I think about this now? So sometimes that feels helpful. Sometimes it feels like, well, I've got to start again. What, you know?
Yeah,
So there's a bit of those pitfalls.
It's absolutely fascinating, because basically what you just described is this kind of really organic way of working, which I really personally relate very much. When I worked with photography, particularly, I was just having this kind of ideas, and I was just exploring things through different forms of experimentation, not only with photography, but with kind of installations and stuff. But I never really knew it took me the project ended somewhere completely in a different place. But then when I think about it, and because you mentioned funding, as we all know, in academic context, especially in relation to creative practice research, this is usually a big issue, because obviously when you apply for funding, or when you have to explain to someone ahead of the time, and I know Jess already has a question here, you kind of have to give the impression that you know exactly what you're doing, which is impossible with creative practices. You cannot possibly know what you're doing, what you will have done in like 3 years or so, however long the project might be.
Yeah.
So how do you manage that in relation to responding to the academic requirements of rigor? How do you
Well,
do
I
it?
mean, there is research questions aimed on objectives and methodology. It's just sometimes that's clearer to people, who provide funding, like they get it, because just of the nature of that project, it kind of maps onto relatively standardized iterations of those things. And then other times when it becomes slightly more speculative, it becomes less understood. And some of this, and it was kind of interesting when I was doing that kind of part of the conference at Kew, because it was clear, within kind of contemporary art discourses, notions of kind of appropriation and using material and all that sort of stuff is really commonplace.
Yes, of course.
But
they
didn't, I had to kind of explain what I meant by that in a different way. So,
which brings me back to this idea. Sorry, Jess, I'm going to take your question right away. I just want to kind of add this comment, but it brings me back to this idea I always discuss about different type of audiences we have for this kind of work. So obviously your artistic audiences, well, paradoxically, we often more understanding when it comes to this kind of work, whereas in academia we very often have to really struggle when it comes to proving the rigor we have behind it. And yes, there's always a research question, there's methodologies, but there's still always this kind of sense of like, what is this about? Like how, so it's quite interesting. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, or should we just take the question from Jess?
Let's take the question from Jez.
Okay, hi Jez.
Hi Jez.
That was a complete cop-out. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I know it was.
Yeah, okay.
Well,
that was a complete cop-out. You should have answered the question of Agata. So, thank you, Ian. Interesting stuff. Obviously, we talked about this before when the project was just beginning. And it seems to me now that even more so that Kew is quite a closed shop, and so not so common culture, which is in relation to what you were producing or could have produced, seems to be a sad opportunity missed. And in relation, and also thinking about what you said with the conference, how your work wasn't really accepted. In the completely opposite side, when I went to do the RGS, I'm going to name drop here with the RGS, my work was really accepted, got very excited, and actually has sort of led to working alongside other researchers. And Agata and I are involved in, a book now, which is going to be at all good bookshops shortly, we hope. The advert goes off there. But do you think your work, and your view of working with those people at Kew, and your attitude with and their attitude with the artist, researcher, illustrator. Do you think there's any future in that for other artists in the future?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just to sort of,
would they be basically would they be open for something else or another? I'm not thinking myself. I'm just thinking of other artists, because it seemed to me that it was a great opportunity lost.
No, but I mean yeah, so just to clarify, well, I guess that the conference, it wasn't that what I was in wasn't accepted. It was just that it was quite out of the experience of many of the people that were there. So I think they enjoyed it, but I think that it was just a bit kind of alien to them. But no, I mean, Kew are great. They're really welcoming. So, and they still are. So there's an open door for me, and I'm going to be going back because there's still stuff to do. So in terms of like a future, they're really interested because the individuals there, I mean, I guess the institution is under the same kind of restrictions that a lot of the institutions that we're in are in terms of finances, but that's not, but they're not being told as staff to not engage with outsiders, and those individuals have autonomy too. So they're great to work with in terms of individuals. So yeah.
Okay, I misunderstood that bit of the funding, etc.
No, but that wasn't the funding from Kew. That was other,
from Lever Home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that, and also that was at the time, and I suspect it might have changed. I'm hoping it has. But,
okay.
But yeah, so I'm quite hopeful that there is a sort of more opportunistic future.
Thank you. I can see that Andy has a hand up, and I was thinking about you, Andy, and your project on landscape, how there's some kind of overlap with Ian's work. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that was really interesting. So I'm doing a PhD in film and TV, and I'm looking at common land. So ideas of more than human interactions are really important. And I'm also been looking at archives as well. So I think you sort of very tantalizingly mentioned earlier on about sort of special kind of ways of knowing and knowledge that you'd come across through the process of this research, which could only have been encountered using a practices research methodology. And I was wondering if you could just say a little bit more about that.
Well, I think, I mean, and maybe you've sort of described it in a slightly kind of better way, but maybe it's a bit. I think I would describe it in much more practical terms, in a way, in the sense that, you know, if I'm kind of interested in connecting certain narratives between kind of a taxonomical report and seeing what that does in relationship to kind of documentary filmmaking or scientific narratives. For me, it's just about a way of bringing them into a certain space. So there's a certain type of collision or tension, or you start to see things lining up in a different way. And I think, and you might recognize this yourself through your own kind of practice, but for me, that's the way I can think about those on the page, and I can kind of write things down and see where they might sit or where the potential is. But it's only really when I start bringing the things together in the ways that I kind of find it in the kind of forms that I make work in, if you like, or it's partly that, and partly that's the forms that I feel like where the research comes together. But I guess it's just those processes for me are particular in that bringing together of things and seeing what happens. Because obviously, as we all know, you kind of bring things together, and sometimes you go, well, that does nothing, or they come together and go, well, that's really working, but in no way what I thought it was going to do. And all of those things are kind of where the kind of research can then move forward through, I think, or not, depending on which is those, you know. But I think it's that kind of the navigating of those things through the process of making things, I think is the bit that I feel where the practice-based is really important.
No, that's really interesting. That's definitely what I found. Bringing things together which otherwise would be quite separate.
Yeah.
In a practice thing. They sit together and kind of cross-fertilize in unusual ways. No, that's really useful. Thank you.
And I think if it's sort of experiential, like for yourself in like film, TV, or in the art world, it's the experiential bit can only be encountered at the point where it exists in whatever material form it exists in. So you can't really second guess. You can you've got a sense of what's going to happen, but that experiential moment is quite a different thing, I think.
No, that's great. Thanks.
I'm sure you will completely know about. But.
Well, yes. I mean, I started off doing a documentary film project and have ended up working on a folk horror screenplay. So, yes, and I found out all sorts of stuff about common land that I would never have found out if I just had studied it purely with text. So, yeah,
that sounds great.
And that's a fascinating thing, which again, like when I think about both of your projects, is really this idea of how making itself triggers new ways of thinking and takes you to different directions, which is very different from when you do like purely theoretical research. It's not that it doesn't give you new insights, of course it does, but in a very different way. This is more it is more organic as well, what I said before, because you kind of engage with you cannot separate yourself from your creative practice, because you're physically engaged in it in one way or another to some degree, depends on what the practice is. So it is very embodied form of work, even if it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a performance or theater. It could be film or fine art, but it is very, very different way of thinking. And what strikes me when I think about your work, Ian, is like it looks like, what I said before, with this kind of organic ways of, that take you to different directions of what you can think about or what it can mean, or what you do with this. It's really fascinating, because personally, I talk a lot about this idea of messiness of creative process and how it's really nicely structured within what the expectations of creative practice research are, how they are embedded within this idea of, yes, you have a research question, and then you kind of frame it within this reflexive evaluation of what you're doing, and yet you go back to this kind of very messy, as I like to call it, organic way of working, and then you repeat that process. And what you were talking about today, just a really great example of that. I don't know if you recognize yourself in what I'm trying to say, but it's just really, as I said, like rarely we have guests here. When I say we, I should say I.
I think one of the things that's quite interesting, because I'm working alongside people who are doing straight PhDs in film and TV, and we've discussed our processes, and those who are doing straight PhDs go through these terrible periods of chaos where they just don't understand what they're doing, and it's very, very stressful. And although you're doing a practice-based PhD is also stressful, it almost feels like the chaos is actually inbuilt. That's something that you're expecting to happen because that's part of the creative process. And that's actually where the majority of the really useful thinking happens. Whereas in a straight PhD, it seems to be something which is to a sense got to be resisted or categorized. So I think you're much more free to kind of investigate that chaotic messiness, as you called it.
Yeah, I think you might be right. It's something that we're kind of used to, but also I guess we feel that it's to a degree it's quite enjoyable.
Yeah,
that it's actually productive and enjoyable. I mean, there's I was speaking to Tim about this the other day. There's a really good project. Oh, what's his name? I've forgotten his name. Anyway, I'll find it. But it's called The Source. It's an artist who kind of just spoke to lots of different practitioners about several aspects, where their ideas were formed, what their process is. And there's a really nice interview with musicians, artists, architects, and there's a really nice interview with Beck, who talks about his songwriting process is to put something like 50 kind of ideas into one song, and he's got a framework of exploring, pushing the boundaries of what would be defined as popular music, and then just what he calls sculpting chaos.
I love it.
As an enjoyable thing. And it's a bit like, relates to what you were just saying, is that, yeah, there is an absolute enjoyment in playing around with that chaos at times.
I love the sound of it, because if you think about sculpting means giving something a form, and yet chaos means something which is formless almost. It's really, it really is interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting. Can I ask one more question? So I really love this idea of appropriation. Obviously, you know, when we look at history of art, you know, it's obviously it's been going on for a century, if no more, and it's an interesting process, and it is difficult these days because of, as you say, the issues of cultural appropriations and ethics. So do you mind telling us a bit more about the processes behind how you think, you know, how you are, when again in a process of planning your project, how do you manage this, and how are you, you know, being mindful of this kind of potential issues with it, and yet enjoy the most of it, because it is impossible not to use some elements of appropriation in, you know, today. Yeah.
But I think it's that you know, it's that the understanding that in a way that it is dependent on the power, where the power lies in that transaction, you know. So if you have this kind of position of power, your appropriation is problematic, because you're kind of there's a kind of benefit one way towards a position that's already it becomes a kind of process of annihilation or further alienation, I think, that process. So we're always, you know, quite aware that when that occurs, it's kind of pulling it from a system of power in order to in some way reflect back on that system of power. So that, I think that's how we would sort of think about it, because that ties in with what we're interested in forming a critique about, and it is generally a position of power, whether that's kind of economic, political, or whatever it might be.
That's also very interesting about your work, what I kind of picked from, I was taking a lot of notes here, this idea how you are, you know, even though you just created pieces of artwork, you're looking at kind of social elements of this, political elements of that. It has potentially really widespread consequences in terms of, you know, if we were to again place it back in academic context, if you were to talk about potential outputs which can be drawn from your artwork, they could be really vast. And again, I'm thinking about audiences as always. So I mentioned before that you know, in terms of academic, artistic audiences, it could be one sort of reception, but then you can take your work and place it in, I don't know, many different journals, conferences, and it seems to me like it would fit in so many different ways and fields and disciplines, which is really interesting, because you seem to be very focused and yet universal with how you approach different things. There's lots of things over there, which is quite interesting, and I don't see it quite often. I don't know if you have any comment on that.
Well, I mean, I guess the subject of either my individual or when we're working with common culture is kind of in relationship directly to the world in which we live, and that's where the kind of discourse comes from. So, you know, I mean, that kind of common culture one as an example is trying to kind of look at the kind of, you know, what's the impact of this type of engagement and attention, you know, on kind of individuals and societies, to the point where they say they don't want to live in the country which they live, you know. So
sorry, which is great, because this is really what art should be. It should be a reflection of what's happening out there, and it obviously shouldn't be necessarily isolated from the world we live in, which is brilliant. Fantastic. Does anyone else have any final question before we wrap it up? No? Brilliant. Well, in that case, I'm just gonna say massive thank you, Ian. Really, really amazing. And I know we had a lot of I was really lucky to have lots of conversations with you quite recently, and I'm sure there's going to be more to follow. But thank you so much. It was just a wonderful way, you know, to wrap up the third round of the Rebellious Research seminar series. So we're going to break for summer right now. I'm going to upload our recording probably by the end of the week, as soon as I get your videos and kind of include them in a recording. And then we're going to resume in October, probably last Wednesday of October as usually. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, who were here today. And yeah, have a lovely summer, I hope.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.